Hi, Betsy.
Hi, how are you?
Very good. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me today.
Great to have you with us. It's I think session number 8 today. So
Amazing.
yeah,
A full day.
yes. So today we have Betsy Vezibula from GitLab with us. As you all know, GitLab is a pioneer in the remote work, and Betsy focuses on sharing the company's all remote brand with the world, and as the all remote evangelist. And prior to joining all remote marketing team, she spent her career in employer branding and recruitment marketing, mostly for high growth tech companies. And it's thanks a lot for spending this time with us, Betsy.
Absolutely.
And the stage is yours.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. All right. So I am Betsy Vezibula, and I am an all remote evangelist at GitLab, which is one of the world's largest all remote companies. So today we're actually going to talk about making remote work, and specifically about remote teamwork and how you can thrive in this post-office world. So I'm going to try to leave a few minutes for questions at the end. So feel free to leave some in the chat as we go. I have been at GitLab for 3 years, and I work most days from this home office here in North Carolina, alongside a very needy golden retriever that you'll see in this photo, who hopefully will not be barking in the background today. But this is my typical office view. So let me tell you a little bit about GitLab. GitLab has been all remote since its inception. We have more than 1,400 team members around 65 countries around the globe. And the GitLab tool is the DevOps platform. It's an amazing collaboration platform that's used by developers around the world to build software and also to work together remotely. And because it's open source, we have lots of organizations and people who co-create with us and contribute to GitLab. But our organizational design is really what we're going to focus on today. And my team's job in all of this is to really help share remote work with the world and talk about how GitLab does it, but also help other companies and teams figure out how they can embrace remote work and the future of living for themselves. So let's take a step back and look at the start of the pandemic. GitLab and other remote companies were joined by hundreds of millions, if not billions of people worldwide, who suddenly were learning to work outside of the office on a scale that we have never seen before in human history. And now that we're almost 2 years into this experiment, believe it or not, more and more major companies are making decisions about the future of work for their teams. And you'll definitely recognize a few of the ones here on this slide. What we're seeing is that this global conversation is shifting from when will we return to the office to, okay, we know remote work is here to stay. So what does that look like for my team, and how do we do this at scale? So before the pandemic, GitLab and some other companies released reports on remote work, which at the time we were really trying to convince the world that this was the future. And when we talked to people who were already working remotely, we found some really interesting results, and I'll let you take a look at these here. So now that we're almost 2 years into this global remote work experience, over the past year, we've actually seen something else happening. The people who work for companies who are not intentionally taking an approach to rethink their processes and really apply remote first principles, those people are really struggling. So we've identified 5 main types of teams on the remote continuum, as we call it. You'll see no remote and all remote on either side, and those are pretty self-explanatory, but you'll find that most teams actually fall somewhere in the middle here. The bottom line when you look at this is that no matter what stage your company or team is in, every single type of team, every person listening today will benefit from putting remote first practices in place, no matter where your work is going to get done. So as we talk about remote teamwork today, we're going to actually touch on a lot of the basics of remote team communication. So first, there's your values, which is really foundational to everything else. And we'll also briefly cover asynchronous communication, which, is going to enable your team to be more inclusive and collaborate more effectively. And then there is the infamous meetings. How do we not spend our whole lives in meetings? And I promise you there is a way. And the last thing that I'll talk about is informal communication. So this is how you stay connected, build camaraderie on your team, and really sustain your culture. So first, let's take a look at values, because this is really the most foundational piece to everything that you do as a team. These are GitLab's values, and it's really crucial, particularly in a remote environment, that these are not just words on a page. So at GitLab, for example, we use our values as criteria for everything from bonuses to promotions to hiring decisions and every big or small decision in between. And so when you're making decisions or incorporating remote first practices to your team or your department, if you find yourself unsure or not able to move forward, go back to your values and look at those and really ask yourself, what would the best choice look like given these shared ideals? And this will sort of act as your North Star as your team grows, no matter where your work is getting done. Another really foundational thing is documentation, and it's just so critical for any remote or hybrid team, really no matter where you are on that remote work spectrum. So a key part of enabling async work is having a centrally located up-to-date handbook or some kind of single source of truth so that you can operate efficiently. At GitLab, we actually maintain a handbook that is more than 2,000 web pages. It's a very large document. It's publicly available. And so anyone listening can go search it right now. And we truly do in that handbook document every single thing that we do, from processes to culture to how we communicate with one another. There are no unwritten rules, and it's a living document that's updated constantly by the entire team. So when you're in a co-located environment where everyone's in the same office, you might just, pop over to someone's desk and ask them a question or even call them. But if you think about it, not only is that disruptive to that person's day, it also breaks down if, that person isn't in the office that day, or they're working a different schedule, or even they're out on PTO. Every question suddenly becomes a delay, and then every conversation takes longer. And it's this huge contributor to burnout. So how do you get started? Even if you don't have a true handbook yet, all you have to do is start with just one thing within your own team. So if you think about the questions that your individual team or your larger department is asked most often, start with those. Document the answers, document the associated processes, and do that in a central location where that you can keep it up to date. Then you can make a plan to expand it and keep it current. So once you have this level of documentation, you're actually able to embrace asynchronous communication, which you may already be experts at. So I apologize if I'm being repetitive of something that you know, but this is really the art of eliminating meetings and synchronous work, making it possible to really get work done on a flexible schedule, which is what we all strive for. So at GitLab, we actually have a bias towards asynchronous communication, but really a strategic balance between synchronous and asynchronous is the most efficient way. Async also means that you are not expected to immediately respond to things. So for example, if a coworker or even your boss emails you on the weekend or sends you a Slack message, just reply on Monday. Now, obviously, if there was something urgent that comes up, team members can ping each other or contact each other, but having this as your default really prevents people from having to filter through information and be on all the time. So on the slide here, I've also listed a few reasons why async is important, but we actually have an entire remote work guide about this. So I would encourage you to go look up, you can just search GitLab asynchronous work and our page about async will come up. Okay, so if you're ready to implement asynchronous communication on your team, here's a little bit of a tip for getting started. As you're incorporating more of this async communication, you want to just first of all remember that iteration and progress are more important than perfection. This is a transition. There are going to be bumps in the road, but your team can figure it out together if you're willing to make iterations along the way. The tools that you use are also really important. So asynchronous communication works best when there's a company-wide alignment on how and where you communicate. So you're really going to want to carefully select the tools and direct communications to as few channels as possible. If you want to know more about how GitLab does this, you can find our handbook page by Googling GitLab Communication Handbook. And then something on this slide that we've tried at GitLab is Async Week, which is where we refocus ourselves on eliminating as many meetings as possible in favor of working asynchronously. And even when you're part of a company like GitLab, with a bias towards async, it's always an important thing to sort of practice and reiterate. As you can see in this tweet on this page, Async Week is very life-giving for me. And in fact, my team is having an async week this week. So this session is actually one of the only times that I will be on video for this entire week, which is really nice because it means that I have lots of focused time to get work done. So let's move on to meetings, because this is the #1 topic that I get questions about. Learning how to do meetings well is truly a very important part of learning to work well remotely. And there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, we are humans, we're social, and we like to talk to each other. So sometimes we call a meeting just because it feels like it will be more fun to talk face to face, whether that's in person or on video. And so, sometimes we also have a situation where that multiplies quickly and suddenly your calendar is back to back and it's not fun at all anymore. The second reason that we might call meetings is we don't trust that we can figure out things asynchronously. And sometimes that can be valid if you want to be actively brainstorming or having a difficult conversation that really does need to happen face to face. But most of the time, we're just defaulting to our old habits. So we really need to question every meeting. It can be really easy to complain that that meeting should have been an email after the fact, but how do you actually go about preventing unnecessary meetings? This does take a bit of practice, but if you ensure that everybody in your organization is bought in on normalizing questioning meetings, you're able to politely decline, knowing it's actually more respectful of your coworkers' time. So on the bottom of this slide is an example that we have in the GitLab handbook that reminds our team members how to do this. And this was actually inspired by something that the team at Dropbox uses internally. So how do you know if you do still need a meeting? Like I mentioned earlier, there is a happy balance between synchronous and asynchronous meetings. So a good way to decide is that if you're going back and forth multiple times with someone and you're not able to reach a resolution, or you're facing some kind of block in communication, it's probably time to meet synchronously. And actually, we'll share a funny story there. We recently had our legal team communicating with another company's legal team about a project we're collaborating on. And there was some confusion over a form that was needed. So we suggested to schedule a sync call after realizing that. But the company actually came back to us and said, hey, can we try to solve this asynchronously instead? And so we were thrilled that they pushed back. And as a result, we were able to solve it that same day without waiting for a meeting to get scheduled, which would have taken so much longer. And it just goes to show that even for a company like GitLab, we are always learning and iterating. But just think about how much time would be saved if every company thinks that way. So when you do have a meeting, be sure to have an agenda so that you're being transparent and inclusive of those who can't attend. And also make sure you're scheduling speedy meetings, which are 25 or 50 minutes long, like this one, because it allows that few minutes of time between each meeting. Hybrid calls are another thing that you'll see in the GitLab handbook. And for hybrid teams, you really want to make sure that your meeting practices are inclusive of those not in the room. So we actually advise the ideal scenario is for everyone to call in from separate rooms with their own audio and video equipment. Another question that we're hearing a lot from companies who are transitioning to remote is, how do we know when our employees are working? And our response to that is, why does it matter how many hours they're working if they're accomplishing their objectives? So building trust in a remote setting really goes both ways. Your leaders have to empower their teams by letting them set their hours, give clear, transparent goals and metrics that they can work towards. And then for an individual contributor, your focus is on producing results so that your work is not measured by whether you attended work, but whether you were actually effective during that time. And so that's why at GitLab, we measure results, not hours spent. Another challenge in remote work is combating isolation and loneliness, and informal communication is one way that we do that. So in a remote environment, you really do have to put more structure around informal communication and create an atmosphere where people feel comfortable reaching out to each other and talk about topics that are not related to work. For example, GitLab team members have informal coffee chats, which I'm sure a lot of you do as well. And this is 30 minutes where two people can talk about anything except for work. And it really helps them get to know each other as more than just coworkers. There are a bunch of other ways that we do this, and I've listed them on the slide. So I'd encourage you to give those a shot and let us know what you think. So this is one of the hardest habits to break, which is separating work and chat. If you think about it, chat tools are actually built to keep our attention and to get us to respond quickly. So they're synchronous by nature. But if you're doing work in your chat tool, it's just not scalable, even if you're a small team. You can't easily find old discussions, it wastes a lot of time, and it just splinters your work across multiple tools. So it's fine to still mention work in your chat tool, but just make sure that any meaningful discussions are happening elsewhere, like in your project tool. So for GitLab, to help keep us honest with this, we actually have all of our Slack messages automatically disappear after 90 days. So it's just a really good forcing function to remind us that for us, our meaningful conversations about work should be happening in the GitLab tool. You also want to be sure that you use your chat tool, to encourage each other to bring your full selves to work. And one way that we do this is using our chat channels for special interests. So we have channels for almost anything you can think of, from different hobbies, the cities that people live in. There's one for parents, there's one for mental health, there's one for skill sharing, and even, as you see on this slide, for dog photos. So it's just a fun way to stay connected and get to know each other. Now, we talk a lot about how to build connections virtually because as an all remote team, that is how we spend most of our time. But there is also great value in gathering in person, not just for getting work done, but for relationship building. So here on this slide are some of the ways that we enable this at GitLab, including our regular company summit, conferences, visiting grants, and local meetups. And some of these have had to pause during the pandemic. So we're really looking forward to being able to hopefully do more of these in person again soon. As your team is working through how to apply remote first principles, give yourselves some grace. No matter where you fall on the remote work spectrum, we are all learning, and we have all been through an unprecedented couple of years. So figuring out what the future of work looks like for your company is going to take time and patience from both your leaders and each of your coworkers. So today, I have honestly only scratched the surface in these slides of all the content that we have to guide people about remote work. So I wanted to share a few of the resources where you can learn more. You can find GitLab's complete guide to remote work on our site, which is allremote.info. And on that site, you'll also find links to a couple of courses that we've created where you can deepen your remote knowledge and even get certified by GitLab for remote work. We also produce a playbook each year, which is really the most comprehensive guide to remote work that you'll find. So we've condensed our 50+ remote work guides into this one resource, and it'll really help you and your teams apply remote principles. You can also download that on that same site, allremote.info. And now I would love to use the rest of the time to answer any questions. So let me check in our chat.
So Doruk from the team is asking, how does going asynchronous effect on the job training?
That's a great question. So this is where I think there's a happy balance between asynchronous and synchronous work. For something like onboarding, you do want to make sure that when someone logs on to their first day in a fully remote job, that they have documented an entire list of what's expected of them, because you don't want to leave them stranded and not knowing what's going on. So, for GitLab, we use the GitLab tool, and we have a whole issue that lists out all the different day by day things that this new hire should, expect to learn. And then beyond that, you also want to set up time where they do have touch points where you can answer questions or, just to get to know each other. So I do think, it requires a bit more of the combination of synchronous and asynchronous if you're doing training, because you do want people to learn to self-serve and be able to find information on their own. But you also don't want to just sort of leave them stranded and figuring it out, by themselves, especially as you're learning and getting on board with a new team.
Yeah, of course. And when you're saying like they have day by day tasks, or like when they are onboarded, how long is it for 2 weeks or 1 week, 1 month?
Yeah, there's actually, our onboarding issue stretches out through the first, 90 days, and it'll be a list of things that you're not necessarily expected to, read the whole handbook within that time, but it breaks it down into a more digestible, first 3 months, really, to help somebody understand that, okay, my first week, these are the things that are expected of me. I don't have to learn every single thing about the company, but I'm going to focus on these tasks. And then, we'll say in the first 30 days, you'll want to have done X, Y, and Z. And then it goes on like that. So that way it's kind of easing people in, setting expectations, and really getting them comfortable with the idea that this is how they work, is that kind of self-service, leaning on documentation, looking things up in the handbook. So it's a cool experience to kind of like dip your toe in a little bit before you go all in on async.
Okay. And for the by the way, we are very happy to have you live with us, especially when it's your only live.
Oh, that's why it's so wonderful. It's easy to schedule.
So we feel privileged. So thanks a lot for that. And for the async week, or for that kind of, many companies, they barely have anything, any protocols for asynchronous communication, because I'm also attending quite a few sessions, and even top management, they're not aware of the word asynchronous, because they are probably still implementing the mandatory remote,
Right.
So what should be the first step towards asynchronous, you think? Like,
the first step is really making sure that you have the documentation there, because if you think about it, if you just tell people, okay, go work without meetings, but they don't have anything to refer to that documents your processes or things like that, you are going to have issues with productivity and efficiency and things like that. So knowing that you at least have this one sort of single source of truth where you can have all of your team referring to the same documents, that is really what's going to allow you to at least start trimming back some meetings. So it's sort of, if you think about it less as let's cancel everything and more focus on which of these meetings are kind of unnecessary, and start there, I think that's a great way to go about it.
And who you think should be the decision maker on this? Like, should it be HR or HR with the business function? Like,
yeah, probably. I think it also is different for each team. So we've noticed that internally, there are plenty of our sales teams that are going to still need to have, customer calls and things like that. So you can certainly incorporate more async into your day, but there are still going to be times when you are going to meet with people outside of GitLab. So, recognizing that let's work with each department and figure out what balance is best for them is probably a good way to go about it. Whereas someone like me in marketing, it's a lot easier for me to say, okay, for this 1 week, we're going to cancel all of our synchronous meetings. I even have a one-on-one today with my manager, but it is an asynchronous one-on-one. So we've got our agenda document. We both add in things that we've been thinking about during the week, and then we can respond to each other on our own time and tag each other for looking at it later.
Interesting. And yeah, Inute from the attendance is asking, do you organize real life face-to-face come together? Actually, you mentioned it's every 9 months, which is also an interesting time frame.
Yes. Yeah. You know, it's funny. I think that was originally decided so that it would be different times of the year when we got together. Yeah. But it has been something we've really missed over the last 2 years because of the pandemic. You know, with a global team, it's really, you know, complicated to get people together, but it's such a worthy thing because it's so helpful for relationship building.
Exactly.
But I will say we are very specific when we get together to not do work during that time. It is purely for getting to know one another and team building and making sure that we have that, you know, camaraderie on the team. And it's then once we're working asynchronously again, we're more efficient as a group.
Yeah. I can imagine. And another question that I have is you mentioned about encouraging personal expression. So how do you do that, especially online, digitally?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. A lot of that happens in our Slack chat channels, and it's a really cool way to do that. You wouldn't think that would be personal, but you know, like my team shares photos from our weekends all the time, and in the channel that we have for parents, we have people sharing photos of their kids and things like that, that frankly, if you were in person in an office, you probably would never know that about your coworkers unless you struck up a conversation intentionally, asking them about their family or their kids or what they did that weekend. So in many ways, it feels like it actually allows you to connect to people more quickly on a more personal level, because you really have to, you know, you're grouping those conversations by themes and encouraging people to share who they really are.
Perfect. And yeah, so regarding chat, you mentioned like it's better for like you are using more the GitLab tool.
Yes.
So how should the companies go by then? Like, should they use email? You know, like what?
Yeah,
Yeah.
It depends on, you know, what your tool set is. I would suggest that whatever your like project management tool is, use that to really focus your work conversations. You want there to be a record. Sorry, what was that?
Can it be Trello?
Yeah, exactly. Trello, any of these tools where everybody can kind of like collaborate together. That's where you want to be doing those, you know, having those work conversations somewhere where there's a record of what's been discussed in the past. If you think about it, if you just had a Slack conversation about a project and then you have a new team member join in 3 months, they have no way of knowing where to find that information, what the history was. And it really does kind of cramp your ability to work asynchronously and to get people on board quickly. So if you do have all of those meaningful conversations really well organized in whatever project management or collaboration tool that you use, you can then, you know, maybe send each other links in Slack, but you want that to direct back to that tool. So it's all about, you know, figuring out what tools you use for what, documenting that, and making sure people use those same tools across the board.
Okay. Great. And for the handbook, we have been, I mean, thanks a lot for all the contribution, because we have also been influenced a lot by the GitLab handbook.
Awesome. I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, super useful for us. Ours is only over 100 something pages. Definitely not 2000 yet, but maybe someday.
You will get there. You will get there.
Yeah. So how do we, so what's the best way to make it a living document?
The best way, you know, GitLab's mission is that everyone can contribute. And so we really apply that to the handbook, and every person at GitLab is able to make a merge request, which is how you make changes in GitLab, and edit our handbook. So, you know, if you are on, for example, my team can update our handbook page at any time and make changes and let the team know, hey, I added this to the handbook. And so the idea is that allowing everybody to contribute to it, you have a more accurate, up-to-date single source of truth. And it's really crucial as you're going through lots of growth and changes, because you want to know that everybody has that same resource to refer to as they're continuing to work together.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, last question. Well, we are getting, I mean, we are already over time, but last question. Yeah. So when we are so most of the companies here, they are shifting to hybrid. Like if you were to leave a few things doing in person, what would those be?
If you were to still do some things in person.
Yeah.
Okay. The number one would be relationship building. You know, it's one of those things that's really crucial to do at some cadence in person. The other thing that you could consider if you do some in-person mixing with some, remote work is to use that time for the sort of creative brainstorming. If you feel like you prefer to do that in person or in a live setting, that can be a great use of that time, but really focus on the things that will help you work better when you are remote. And a lot of times that's really learning about each other and your quirks and your personalities, and then being able to work seamlessly as a team later on.
So the best thing is to hang around. When
Yes.
together, right? Get
to know each other as people. We don't have to just be coworkers. Yeah.
Cool. Betsy, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Super beautiful. Thanks a lot for this time.
Absolutely. I appreciate being included, and I hope the rest of everything goes great.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.